Before we start today's video, I would like to thank the 100 plus people that subscribe to me on BitChute. Thank you. Second, at 9:30 PM GMT, I will be streaming on the Cthulhu-Kin and Friends show. It will, again because Parliament is in recess, be a political recap. Link to that in the description. Now, the subject of today's video is how the bourgeoisie are to blame for the bourgeoisie. Or, to correctly state what the title is, how hegemonic masculinity is to blame for homeless men being homeless. Not even a joke. Who would have believed a professor at Wilfred Laurier University would conjure up such trash? And I'm going to say this now. I have read the abstract to the page that she is referring to in this article. Unfortunately, I have not had access yet to the entire chapter. I will of course try to get my hands on it, and then hopefully make a video on that in the near future. So, a feminist professor at Wilfred Laurier University in Canada recently published a book chapter documenting the myriad ways homeless men allegedly perpetuate hegemonic masculinity while discussing their hardships. Yes, the ultimate form of victim blaming is to blame homeless men for discussing their issues, where some will undoubtedly harbour hate and therefore they must be blamed for it. I am firmly of the belief, and I'm going to state this now, that if someone is homeless, we shouldn't instead look to blame them for it. We should look for a solution to help them. A shelter, perhaps. Drug rehabilitation, if at all possible. Education, as well. Give them what they need, if possible, to get them back on their feet. Not all are career homeless people. Some are mentally ill. Some are drug addicts. Some are people who have lost their homes after failed marriages. Because as we all know, women are a protected class, whether you like that or not, and I might make a video on that in the future on its own, on how women are a protected class. I know, misogyny. Stop me now. The book chapter, When a Man's Home is Not a Castle, Hegemonic Masculinity Among Men Experiencing Homelessness, was published last Wednesday by a Professor Erin Dej in a book she co-edited on patriarchy in psychiatric wards and homeless shelters. Yes, I noticed there were a number of chapters that stood out. For example, Sickening Institutions, Feminist Sociological Analysis and Critique of Religion, Medicine and Psychiatry, because what you really need is a feminist lens on religion, which is backwards enough as it is. Medicine, what are you going to do? Deal with the prescription gap? And psychiatry, well, as we've already ascertained, your feminist lens is to victim blame. Congratulations. Oh, and another chapter, Uncovering the Heteronormative Order of the Psychiatric Institution. Right. Much oppression, of course. The goal of her research, she explains, was to assess the ways hypermasculinity is performed among men experiencing homelessness. And to do this, Dej interviewed 27 homeless men and spent an additional 296 hours spying on them in homeless shelters. This has raised a number of alarm bells, because this is an academic who has published a book chapter with a size pool for research of 27, and her fieldwork being 296 hours without consent, spying on people who are broken, downtrodden, and living in the lowest possible situation they can be, under very different circumstances, because of course, no one homeless man can truly be considered the same as someone else. Everyone has their own unique story, and that's important. Do you really think you're going to get all the information you need from 27? And we know in this article, and you all, certainly the viewers, will know later, that she does interview some, and the pieces from that I was unable to obtain through the abstract show quite a deluded mindset by the writer, who I believe the first time I recorded this I called a prick and a faux academic. And I also want to make this quite clear now. By spying on them, by being in their personal space, by not getting consent from them, instead potentially doing it through an ethics board, I don't think any ethics board would in their right mind permit you to do this, because this is an invasion of what little personal space these very much defeated people have. And I know some people don't like hearing this, but when an animal is wounded, it looks to defend itself in any way it can, and sometimes that does mean relying on things like their pride. You don't do what the army does with recruits and continue to break them down so you can rebuild them, because you're not trying to rebuild them. You are identifying something you consider to be the problem, and you are doing that because you are an ideologue, and then you are positing the idea in the form of some kind of profound hypothesis that men are to blame for their own situation going wrong, which is quite a grand one at that. We all know mitigating factors and context is key. It's why I don't care for these kind of studies that are so small, because they don't represent all homeless people. And it is quite worrying, because it is, as stated twice already, it is victim blaming from the faux academic, and this annoys me a lot also from the humanities departments. It drives me insane. Why on earth does anyone want to invest money in studies, books, journals that are written by people who are looking for a problem because it's all they have to keep their job alive? While research on vulnerable people typically requires informed consent and approval by an ethics board, it is unclear if Dej sought this. Well, if the book has been published, chances are she did get some kind of permission. Otherwise it would not get that far. She declined to comment on this when emailed by PJ Media, and her research makes no mention of ethics review. Ooh, naughty, naughty. During interviews with homeless men, Dej claims she learned that many aspire to hegemonic masculinity, which she defines as the type of masculinity that serves to fortify the dominance of men and ultimately subordinate women. However, she finds that it is difficult for homeless men to achieve this. Well, imagine my freaking shock. Without the trappings of a successful life, or the possibility of being able to re-obtain any semblance of a moderately successful life, such as a home or a career, which could have both been lost. Maybe the second led to the first, and of course then subsequent marriage failure. Many men instead develop what Dej refers to as compensatory masculinity to cope with their failed status. Again, further proving a point I made earlier, when I said that men do then go on the defensive. They want to find something that they can then cling to. This type of masculinity is worse than hegemonic masculinity, though not yet as bad as toxic masculinity. Dun dun dun! And it involves men emphasizing whatever hyper-masculine traits they can within their stratified social status, to the detriment, allegedly, of women. Because of course women are totally going to suffer when some homeless dude asks them for change. Throughout her paper, as she writes up her research findings, Dej ridicules these men for everything, from reinforcing gender stereotypes, to refusing to show emotion, to talking about how their ex-wife stole money from them. 1. There is nothing wrong with not showing emotion. 2. Yeah, I think a lot of guys would consider it stolen if they earned the money. Just saying. I know that some women are the home carer kind of person. I get it, so they should be entitled to some. But as we all know, a lot of courts give them more than some, to the point where, well, we end up with homeless men. For example, and we've got 2 examples here, so I'm going to read them all. Julian, a homeless 45-year-old man with severe anxiety, was accused by Dej of perpetuating stereotypes when he confessed that, "I'm ashamed that I have problems. Like, guys in our society are not supposed to have problems." Dej also interviewed Ron, a 41-year-old homeless man with depression and PTSD. Ron used various drugs to cope with his mental health issues, and by age 41, this had taken a heavy toll on him, causing breathing problems and muscle weakness. "I walked down the street and like a little girl could have killed me. That's how weak I was." Extrapolating from this comment, Dej then suggested that Ron somehow views women en masse negatively. For Ron, the feminine subjectivity acts as the ultimate exemplar of physical weakness and the most absurd hyperbole of who constitutes a threat. He has failed to live up to the basic tenets of hegemonic masculinity. From these pathetic interviews, you have managed to extrapolate some quite frankly disgusting views. And it is through that feminist lens that you've done this. This is why people don't like feminism, because it comes up with this. And I really want to get my hands on that paper now, because I want to give you the Pippa Harron treatment. I'm in that kind of mood, you know? You just want to destroy someone. Kind of like how you did the guys you interviewed, and the many you must have watched for the 296 hours you supposedly spied on them. I'd put money on it for only being 2 hours. You just stood there in a corner of a bridge and watched these homeless men huddled around a fire, drinking really cheap cider. Now, to finish this video off, I want to finish with a conclusion. You are a faux academic. Live with that. But also, I don't think the way to treat homeless people is to attack them, which is what you are doing with your assertions. Because from what we have seen, you don't really provide any evidence to support it. And of course, yes, I do need to see the full thing to be able to properly draw that conclusion, so I guess you could call my answer an assertion as well. But I also think the best way to treat a problem is not to look for someone to blame for the problem existing, but to treat the problem. The problem in this instance isn't masculinity, it's homelessness. You are instead looking to blame someone for it, and you have decided, through your laughable research, that it is men who should take the blame for it. Because they are angry, because they have drug problems, because they are depressed, because they feel weak and demasculated. Which, by the way, there is nothing wrong with being masculine. If someone attacks my masculinity, I'm going to attack them back. Except for the trolls, because honestly I just don't. But I think most people, except for Socky, I think most of them know what I mean, because he's a drunk. Anyway, if I'm able to get hold of the paper for this, yes, expect a video on it in the future. And possibly on the other thing that I've forgotten about. So I hope everyone has a lovely Thursday, subsequent Friday and weekend, and thank you all for listening.
Oh, goddowns.
In your arse.
Imagine my shock